sit there in silence and get your mind right, because this is the biggest game of your career, and you're going against Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, GOAT QB, GOAT coach. We all know how many championships they won together, the dynasty that they put together over time. But for me, I'm a competitor in all things. So I always run towards the hardest things, or the things that people say I can't do, and I love to compete in it. And it's not to prove, and I think we get caught up in this too, to prove the haters wrong, but it's to prove your supporters right. I would go to class and, say I get out at 5. I would go home and eat if I got out at 5, I get home at 6, slow walker. From 6 to 7, I would eat, watch TV, and then from 7 to midnight, I would study. I would do that every day.
Wow.
And then I would do that on Fridays. I would do that on Saturdays. And then if I needed to, I would do that on Sundays. And I did that for a full year. Yeah, high stakes, high pressure, high visibility. And I needed something very similar. And so all that to say, I kind of boiled down to investment banking or trading. I think to be more well-rounded, I think, investment banking will provide that opportunity.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Rare Liquid podcast. Today, I'm going to be having a conversation with Brandon Brooks, who played in the NFL for 10 years and won Super Bowl 52 with the Eagles against Tom Brady and the Patriots. Brandon is also a fellow Wharton MBA classmate, and this past summer, he interned at Goldman Sachs as an investment banking summer associate in New York in their TMT group. And so I hope you enjoyed this wide-ranging conversation where we discuss Brandon's upbringing, his relationship with money, his battle with mental health, his time in the league in the NFL, his new career path in investment banking, and a whole lot more. Now, before jumping into the interview, I wanted to let you guys know about today's sponsor for the video, Wall Street Prep, which for Wharton MBA students is our go-to resource for learning how to build financial models, and I highly recommend their courses. Wall Street Prep offers financial modeling courses so you can be ready not just for interviews, but your job on the desk as a banker. And what I really like is that they have you dig into financial statements and build models using real numbers, just like what I used to do at JP Morgan. They offer a lot of great courses, but the two I particularly recommend are the accounting course if you don't have prior accounting knowledge, and the premium modeling package, which has been taken by over 100,000 students and goes over all the key valuation concepts I learned in banking, like DCFs, comps, accretion dilution, and LBOs. Wall Street Prep has been around since 2004, and they help train employees at all of the top banks and institutions in the world, including at Wharton, where my classmates have been attending live instructor sessions. If you're interested in a course from Wall Street Prep, be sure to use my code RARELIQUID to get 20% off, and I'll leave links to all of this in the description. So Brandon, first of all, thanks so much for sitting down with me and agreeing to chat. And I wanted to start things off with what you said once in an interview, which is that you've always been a fighter, especially in the toughest moments. That's when I fight the best. So can you actually just start off by telling us a bit about your background and how you developed this mentality?
So born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Went to Riverside High School, which is where I started playing football. Got a scholarship to, a few different schools, Boston College, Wisconsin, NC State. Out of all those, I ended up going to Miami of Ohio. And then got drafted in the 3rd round by the Houston Texans in 2012. Was there for 4 years, and then became a free agent, signed a 5-year deal here in 2016, and then signed another 4-year deal here in 2019. Obviously, I retired in 2022. And then during that season, I got injured, and then I, took the study for the GMAT. It's funny because I was supposed to announce my retirement like that first week after the season. And I was like, dude, I got to take the GMAT first, man. So that's when I had scheduled it. So I actually pushed it to the following week. So it was like GMAT, retirement. Applied round 3, got accepted to Wharton in 2022, and then, started, when we started August 4th.
Yeah, around mid late August, yeah.
Yeah, and then just kind of bringing you up to speed. But, what I meant by that is, if you look at my life, right, nothing has been handed to me, and I have not gotten things, the easy way. And so just started playing football, when I was 12 in high school, and, trying to pick up the game and, trying to excel. And, out of the gate, it was I was trying to get the rules and how to step and how to move. And so, it was kind of behind the ball as far as that. But I think my calling card has been through all of this is persistence, consistency, and hard work. And so by the time I was a junior, I had I felt like I had some talent. And then going into my senior year, I looked at it like, at the very least, I have an opportunity to, get a scholarship and get a free education. My mom has always been, a huge proponent of education. So it was instilled in me from a young age. And then it was like I committed to Wisconsin, then I decommitted and went to Miami. And then it was like, you didn't want to play big time football, or like you're going into a MAC school. Like, how do you think you're going to get to the NFL? And to be honest, I never thought I even wanted to get to the NFL. Like, I never thought that far out. It was just like, this is an opportunity to get a free education, in college. My parents not being able to afford it. And so, Miami University, I think is very similar to Villanova, where, you can play although on a smaller scale, a high quality, football and then get a good education, which I'm very fortunate looking back, hindsight being 2020, that I did go to a school like that. And then even coming out, I started out after my senior year projected as like a 7th round to like free agent, and didn't get invited to the combine, right? And so it was like I kind of, had to scratch and claw. And so the first thing I realized about, kind of how MAC football is viewed is just like, it's not a Power 5 conference, and it's like, you weren't playing like the top guys, so we don't know how you would pan out at this level. And so I understood that the first 4 games in a MAC schedule, you're playing like the bigger schools, Cincinnati, Florida, Vanderbilt's, like, against guys who they, essentially are coming there to watch. And then if you can pop out on film while they're watching it, they're like, who's this guy? And so, I took those first 4 games serious, like, every year, because it was like I get to prove myself against, some of the best players in the country. And then because I didn't get invited to the combine, obviously, pro day was big, which is like, a combine at your school. But also realized that playing at the East-West game, it was, again, a bunch of players from Power 5 conferences. And like, if I can hold my own here and, stand out on tape, that will do me justice in the long run. And so I did well in the East-West game and, blew up the combine. And by the end of that, I ended up being projected as a, 3rd or 4th round pick. And kind of, just waited once the draft, comes around. I think a lot of people think like, you must know something prior to getting that call. And the truth is, like, you don't know like what team you're going to. You can have some feelers.
Yeah.
Or even what round you're going to get drafted. And so, I always say this, and I love Coups to death. Gary Kubiak, the head coach of the Texans, phenomenal coach, phenomenal person. When we went down and I visited the Texans, and now because I didn't go to the combine, each team had to perform its own, medical due diligence. And so 14 different teams, 14 different doctors, 14 different, MRIs, x-rays, the whole 9.
Wow.
And so like, I'm just going through the circuit, right?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I got to Houston, and Kubiak, he was just like, has anybody ever told you, like, you can play fucking harder? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm probably not coming here, like, if this is like the conversation. And then, sure enough, like, I ended up in Houston. And between Kubiak, the older guys that I had, Dwayne Brown, Chris Myers, Wade Smith, kind of being mentors and showing me, how to be a pro, how to approach the game, how to play, and how to handle things outside. I couldn't. Oh, and Derek Newton, man, is like family. Probably thought I was gonna forget you, but like having those dudes around, really helped my development. And then even then, it was like, I was a 3rd round pick. And you go from, the MAC where maybe you have 7 plays or something, and now you have, hundreds of plays and different adjustments that you got to make at the snap, and like trying to get that down. Now I'm living in Houston. I had never lived in the South. I had, I was on scholarship, so I had never like paid rent. And you realize that like not having credit is essentially just as bad as having bad credit. And so like, renting a place, renting a car, figuring out like how to get from that place, like to the stadium, everything that's coming with being a pro outside of the game on top of inside, like actually playing the game. And so that's what I mean. And then obviously, I've had my struggles with mental health, and sometimes it feels like the weight of the world's on your shoulders, and some people don't like come out of that. And so that's what I mean by I've always been a fighter where nothing was ever handed to me, and through it all, I've had success.
Okay, so there's a ton to unpack there, and we're definitely going to go through all of that, all of the different things you mentioned, including the NFL and also your battles with mental health and your outspoken actions in your fight against mental health. I was actually just curious, so when you were discussing how you weren't sure if you were going to go pro, did you have like a moment either in high school or in college where you had that belief kind of start to form where you said, oh, I think I can go pro?
Yeah, so it was like my junior year going into my senior year when I was at Miami. And basically what confirmed it for me that I at least had an opportunity or a shot was agents started calling me like, hey, I want to represent you, or, if you do this, you can increase your draft stock, like different things like that. And different magazines were coming out about, some of the top players coming out, at my position, and I was in it. And so it was just like, oh, maybe I have an opportunity to make a team. If you'd have told me at that time, I would have, played 10 years, won a Super Bowl, been a Pro Bowler, all this other stuff. I wouldn't have believed you, but to what I was saying earlier, man, it's just, hard work, man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was at that kind of, fork in the road moment where it's like, oh, I must be on the right track. I must be doing something right. Yeah.
If you didn't go pro to the NFL, what were your plans? What were you thinking about doing instead?
Yeah, I probably went down the business route. It's funny to even say this, but, ever since probably my second year, I started doing internships in the off seasons, for a little bit. I was taking class at University of Houston, at their MBA program at the time. And so I've always had a passion, to do this. And it's funny because when I was working in the summer, it was just I was telling people this story, and a couple people were like, dude, there's no way, in your second year, you're thinking about, going to grad school. And it's just like, man, it's something that I've always wanted to pursue, something I wanted to do. And I always felt like the best way to kind of better understand whatever you want to do in yourself is to, gain experience. And that's what I did.
Where do you think that came from, your interest in business? And to clarify, you're saying your second year in the NFL, you're saying you wanted to do grad school, and that was, you already had that idea. Yeah. Where did all of that come from?
Statistically, man, 7 to 10 of us or 8 to 10 of us go broke. And it's you come into a lot of money very early, and whether you want to go into business or not, you need to know how money flows. You need to understand not just saving, but investing, letting your money, work for you along that process. And I realized that once I started doing internships, I actually had a passion for this. It's something that I wanted to do. And so, over time, I interned more and more, and, was able to connect with people in the business space and, have them mentor me and, kind of show me what I needed to know, what was important. So
I'm curious then, when you first got your big paycheck from the NFL, how did you spend that first paycheck?
Honestly, I didn't really spend money or buy anything crazy until year 8. Wow. I didn't know how long I was going to be in the NFL. And I wanted to, just stack my money and let it, watch it grow, over time. So, lease a car, rent a place. But it wasn't until 2018 where, I bought a house here, and then, I was bought a car and things like that. And then paid my mom's house off, and, got her a car or, whatever she needed. And yeah, that's probably, I guess, when I started spending money.
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. You seems like you've always been pretty good about investing, saving your money. And I guess, so it was mostly from those internships and people kind of mentoring you, because I feel like maybe if from a fan's perspective or just a layman's perspective, it seems like a lot of athletes, when they're making a lot of money and it's spend it however they want and etc. Do you guys have like classes or anything where people are teaching you and your teammates like, hey, this is how you should be investing your money and etc. And is there like plans that they give to you guys, or are you kind of just all on your own?
So like they have, every year people come around and like, whether it's your 401k, like how do you want to invest in this, or different resources that you can, whether it's a website or like maybe a class in the off season. I believe that, will give you some type of base knowledge as far as, what's going on. But I want a little bit more in-depth knowledge and have more control over, my finances and, things like that. Because, you can say you're invested, but if you don't understand like how your portfolio is invested, what the fees are, like where the market's going and like how things are impacted based on what's happening economically. Like, I mean, you don't know what they're putting together. Like they put anything together to make it look like however they wanted to, right? And so, that was my biggest thing. And kind of like a catalyst for this actually was when I got drafted to Houston. My roommate was Randy Bullock. He was from A&M. He was a kicker. And it was a memo that ran around the league about basically my first financial advisor, who he had older clients and like got involved in like a Ponzi scheme. And, nothing happened to me. I mean, to be honest, I don't really think, I didn't really have like that much money at the time compared to these other guys. But if you look back at like how I was investing, man, like it was more about kind of kickbacks and fees for him. Was I making money? But like, you got to think, right? Like, if you get a couple percent and he getting a couple percent for the kickback, man, you're netting essentially zero, right? So like, or 1% or 2%. But, once I kind of like saw that, that's kind of like also it kicks me into like, dude, like you didn't really know what was going on. And like, this is how easily, things can kind of go sideways. And so, it just kind of sparked the interest too as well.
And then now with your career earnings and everything, with your investments, do you like work with like an investment advisor, or do you kind of manage a lot of things yourself? Like what's your kind of general strategy?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a team. Ironically, it is Goldman Sachs. I've been with Goldman Sachs since 2013 as far as managing my money. And like over the years, as time has went on, I've gotten more and more invested. Now, one, that is their job. And two, like they're, for the private wealth wise, like more in tune with what's going on than like me, like looking. And I do like check like probably every couple of days as far as what's going on. And from an economic standpoint, I see what's going on and see how it can impact my portfolio. But as far as like picking, investment vehicles, I let them do their thing. Like I'll double check it. And then like, if it's some bullshit, like I'll definitely be like, yo, like, fuck are you guys doing? Like, are you crazy? You know what I mean? But, overall the team is good. I've built the same team here in Philly since 2016. And, I usually move my money with me. And so when I was in Houston, it was there. And then when it was Philly, like I had, switched investment teams to a team here just because like, dude, I mean, when money's involved, like shit, I don't want to call you on the phone. Like I'm going to fucking show up. Like, I got questions. So, so yeah, I mean, that was, it's how I manage my money.
Gotcha. And this is the last question about money related things, but I'm curious about your relationship with money and how it might've changed. You mentioned, you kind of started football because you wanted to get a free education. You go into the NFL and then over a decade, you accumulate all this wealth. Are there any, I don't know, like I think for me as well, like having worked in banking and then I didn't make like tons and tons of money, but it was like pretty good for my, being my younger 20s. And then I kind of invested everything in like a business and then kind of lost a lot of it and kind of struggled a lot financially. And now things are a little bit better with like Rare Liquid and the business and everything. But my relationship with money has also fluctuated quite a bit when I like had it and didn't. I'm curious about you now at this point, or what was that relationship kind of like for you in a sense? And then how do you kind of see it now? Like what kind of value, does it bring you a ton of like value, happiness? Because there's always this notion of like people who are wealthy who say money's not everything, right? So I'm curious to know like your perspective.
Well, I guess to start off with what you said in the latter, right? Like I think until you get money, you don't understand that money doesn't create happiness. You're I don't want to say consumed, but you're thinking about how to make money and live whatever lifestyle you want to live. But then once you get money, and I mean money where it creates freedom. And what I mean by that is like money is not everything. But what money does is it creates the freedom for you to do what you want, how you want to do it, when you want to do it. And that type of freedom, is unmatched. And so in that regard, money comes in, but, I just look at money like a tool. Like, I can do whatever, again, however, whenever, and, not really like worry about money. And, at this point, like I don't touch my actual money. Like it's just like, or I don't touch my principal, man. I'm just living off investments. It's, like I said, just a good vehicle to do different things. Money is definitely not happiness. And I can't, stress that enough. But I do understand that, when you don't have it, like you're trying to get it, because it does make, kind of grease the wheels as far as like life, make things, a little bit easier, as far as, whatever you want to do. My relationship with money just overall is like, yeah, like I have financial freedom, like the whole nine, but like, money, doesn't give me the power, right, to like, act any type of way, or, I don't think I'm better than somebody because I have money, or, things along that line. I think too many times people get, this is a family show.
Is this a family show?
Yeah.
Oh, not really.
Okay, yeah. People get it fucked up, man, thinking like, just because you got money, like you can control somebody, or, you can act any type of way, or like you're better than somebody because you have money. Like, nah, because to your point, right, like you can lose it just as quickly as you get it. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it's just kind of just a tool.
On that note, then, what does bring you happiness these days?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. I'm a competitor, man. I love to win. I love to compete in the highest of arenas against, the best, no matter what I'm doing. And I think I realized that, some people love to compete in one thing, and usually the gift that God has given them. But for me, I'm a competitor in all things. So like, I always run towards the hardest things, or the things that people say I can't do, and I love to compete in it. And it's not to prove, and I think we get caught up in this too, to prove the haters wrong, but it's to prove your supporters right. And I think my view kind of shifted on that as well over time. And so I love to compete. I love to win. I love to see my friends win. And just overall, just love to see people happy, man. I think sometimes we make life more complex than it is sometimes, in different ways. But yeah, I think that's what brings me happiness, and obviously being around my family too. So
yeah, on the note of family, actually, so in your commencement speech at Miami, you said something along the lines of "Women are not the weaker sex. That's fake news." I really resonated with that a lot, because the strongest people in my life have actually been women as well. And so I wanted to ask if you could touch a bit upon your mom and how she supported you, what kind of values she's instilled within you throughout your life.
Yeah, I got to first start. I was saying, like, dude, my mom's a tough motherfucker, man. Like, dude, she's 6 foot, man. So like, she didn't fuck around when I was growing up. Like, it was, she was about business, man. Like, it was always education, doing things the right way, working hard. Not to quote Lil Wayne, but Lil Wayne said a line that was like, life is tough but fair. And it's like, if you want something, like, go work hard for it. Like, go get it. It's okay to do that. My mom, she actually majors in chemistry at the University of Eau Claire. And she was a chemist for a couple of years, and then went back and actually got her MBA in supply chain, and then worked at Miller Brewery doing supply chain for, like 20, 30 years. And then she actually retired. We retired the same year, actually.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that's cool. But yeah, cool. She retired, and dude, she's like, she can't stay retired. And we're very similar. Like, once we, start one thing, it's kind of like, okay, like, what do you want to do next? It's not like, oh, I'm just going to like chill or, whatever. And so she ended up getting like certifications in like medical billing and coding, and like doing all this other shit now too. And so like, she's always kind of like just been my compass, always kind of been my rock in my corner, as far as telling me like, yo, you can do it. Like, yo, go get it. Yo, put the work in to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think too many times, like, for whatever reason, women are seen as weaker, but dude, women are, strong people, and, they're just as good, anything that, a man can do. And so, I had to touch on that, and kind of what I said along those lines was, she was, my compass, man. Keeping me on the straight and narrow, because there was times where, it was a fork in the road, could have went right, could have went left,
Yeah.
So now she always kept me honest, and, that's what I always say about the education piece, man. Like, no matter how, great I was in the NFL or how many accomplishments I achieved or even how much money I had, she would always be like, she's like, when are you going back to school? Like, dude, just won a Super Bowl, man. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, but like it's a great accomplishment. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, are you going back to school or not? Like, and so, when she comes to graduation, I think that will be, for her and me, really neck and neck with the Super Bowl, getting a degree from, Penn, Wharton, what it means and signifies. So, that's
that's great. And that's so funny that after winning the Super Bowl, she was like, oh, when you're getting your next degree. And it sounds like she was also like a solid rock kind of in terms of giving you guidance and just keeping you, I guess, grounded.
For sure.
And kind of switching gears now to the NFL. And you had to basically, as a starter, kind of defend or kind of win your position or become stay a starter is extremely competitive in the NFL. And a lot of players, coaches, and fans mentioned that at your peak, you're one of the best offensive guards. And so first of all, just like how tough was it each day to kind of defend your starting position?
Dude, this is the best analogy I can use. Like, imagine every day you came into Wharton, you took a test, and if you got a 99%, like somebody would come in and be like, dude, grab your bag, like next person in because you got 100. That was every day. And so like it was super competitive. It was always a grind, but I've always loved the journey just as much as the destination. And to what I said earlier, dude, I'm just a super competitor. Like, dude, I love that shit, dude. Like, I fed off that shit. Like,
wow.
Shit goes sideways, or like for a second people think I'm not, who I am or whatever, dude, like that would send me to, in hyperdrive to another level, man. And so, yeah, once I became a starter, year two, every year, man. And that's, the NFL, right? Not for long, right? So, yeah, there was always guys, trying to get your spot or, trying to beat you out or, X, Y, and Z. And so you constantly have to be on your A game. You constantly have to grind. And I always say, like, high school, college, it's like potential. The NFL's production. Like, you either produce or, like, you're not here. And so, I can't, count how many guys will, rotate in and out the building, man. It's just, the way of life. Excuse me, in any given season. And so, yeah, it was a grind, man. But, in the off seasons, I enjoyed that. Like, the off seasons, I didn't like go vacation and stuff. I would just stay in the city I played and continue to go in the weight room, continue to push myself physically, but also push myself mentally. They always say the game is 80% mental and like 20%, physical. And so, making sure I had all the plays down and, I was as strong as I could physically while, staying healthy. I was very fortunate that I came into a room with, really good players, and I saw what it's like to be good in Houston. And I had a great coach in John Benton as far as teaching me the fundamentals and techniques. And then coming here, having the best O-line coach in the NFL and playing with Kelsey, Lane, Jason Peters, guys who, Jason Peters, man, I mean, fuck, dude, he has like 10 Pro Bowls and fucking 15. We used to call him Mr. Gold Jacket, like first ballot Hall of Famer. But when I came here, like, me, Kelsey, and Lane, like, we hadn't made a Pro Bowl or anything yet. So, like, but we were players that were kind of like, ascending in our position. And so I always say, man, like, dude, when you're around dogs, like, either you're going to be, become a dog or become dog food. And so, I had to, up my game, and I learned from, everybody along the line, including, and Stout included. And, the rest is history, as they say.
So you mentioned that you're extremely competitive. And by the way, that analogy is pretty scary, that if you're getting a 99 and someone's getting 100, just that extremely thin margin of error can be the difference between your starting position or maybe not even having a job in the NFL. And so I'm wondering, with this competitive nature that you have, did it come from anywhere? Were you just like born with it, or was it kind of developed over time?
So my mom's super competitive. My mom's just as competitive as me. There's been times where, and we don't even like compete versus each other because like shit just goes sideways, dude. Like, I went home maybe a couple of summers ago, And like my mom had got pop a shot and she fucking set me up, dude. She had been fucking practicing. She fucking smoked me for like 3 straight games. I was pissed. We played probably the next fucking 2 hours. Cause like, dude, I can't walk out of here to just get, getting beat like this. But my mom's super competitive, man. My mom actually played basketball in college. And everything she's done, man, kind of helped shape me in that competitive light as well. And so, yeah, I've always been a competitor. I've always, loved to compete. Always, try to win. So, yeah.
And I guess with your competitive nature, I've also, I guess this is a quote from your Eagles head coach, Doug Peterson. He said about you, he wanted everything to be perfect, everything to be right. He didn't want to miss an assignment even in practice. So this mentality of like perfectionism as well, does that also come from your mom, or did you develop that somehow on your own?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for me, man. That kind of plays into, my mental health as well. Anything less than perfection, man, I just can't accept. Like, I can't sleep at night. I'll always go back and think about, like, damn, like, say 80 plays in a game. If I had 75 perfect plays and those 5 I fucked up, dude, I'm thinking about those 5 for the next 24 hours. And it's no different even being in grad school. Although I realize that no one is perfect, I still strive to do that. But also at this point, you got to realize you got to give yourself grace. As you try anything new, like, you will make stupid mistakes and you will, get down on yourself. But like, you got to understand, like, this is new. Like, this is your first time. Like, it's bound to happen, as you do this. But yeah, no, I mean, that quote is, just me, kind of just in a nutshell. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. And I believe that. I live by that. And, it's no different for me in school, right? Like, can I be more social? Like, yeah, for sure. But it's like, this is new for me. And what I'm going into, like, the better I can get at this now, the faster, and better I can compete. And, going to a school like Wharton is just like similar to football. The more reps, the better I'll get. And I don't need a huge jump because I'm not looking for instant gratification. I know through the hard work and through that process in due time, I will be where I need to be. And if the only thing that is stopping me from success is hard work, well, fuck, that shit's easy for me. Like, that's, that's fine. Like, one thing about the NFL that you don't realize until you leave is some of the things that are instilled in you, teamwork, working hard, dealing with adversity, and you don't watch the clock, for the job. You work until the job is done. And so it's not about the time. It's like, I started this and now I go complete this. It doesn't matter how long it took me to do it. It doesn't matter how fucking hard it was. It doesn't matter what I had going on. I am here, I am present, and this is what I'm focused on. And I will do it to the best of my ability every time. And so, yeah, man, that's where it stems from. And I do realize for me it's a double-edged sword because I literally drive myself fucking insane sometimes. But, as I've gotten older, I've learned to be more forgiving and give myself more grace. When I do like fail or fuck up, it's not the end of the world. You can say the weight of the world is on your shoulders, but like, it's really not. Like, it just feels that way because, I don't want to fuck up, but, it's bound to happen, man.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of what you just said are actually good, I don't know, like quote unquote kind of good mentalities also in banking as well. Like, whatever you have in front of you, get it done no matter how long it takes. Perfectionism, it's kind of needed in banking also because everything needs to be perfect. And we'll talk about your internship at Goldman a bit later, but I do want to stay with the NFL a little bit, talk about the Super Bowl a bit. So let's rewind the clock back to February 4th, 2018. And so it's Sunday morning and you just wake up. Can you walk us through your preparation that morning at home before you get in your car and go play at the Super Bowl? Like, what are the things you're doing?
Well, so the first thing I did, I woke up probably about 5 a.m., threw up, did that before every game. Me and Lane, it's funny because like we didn't know this, but over time we did. I think we had like a room next to each other and I heard somebody throwing it through the fucking vent. I'm like, Lane, is that you? And he was like, yeah, I do this shit every fucking, time. I'm like, I'm doing this fucking same thing, dude. And we would always talk about it. We would text each other like 5 in the morning, like, again, huh? He's like, yeah, man, like, it just is what it is. That's how we felt we were ready. And it was weird because like if we didn't throw up, it felt like we weren't ready. Like, why are we not throwing up? And so wake up, throw up, kind of sit there in silence and like, get your mind right. Cause this is the biggest game of your career and you're going against Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, GOAT QB, GOAT coach. We all know how many championships they won together, the dynasty that they put together over time. And go down for breakfast. I always, kept it light. Weird combination I would always eat, scrambled eggs and pineapple. I don't know why, but like it just worked for me. I prefer to go into games on a lighter stomach where I felt like, I can move around and, do whatever. Then, get on the team bus, go to, M&T Bank Stadium? Is that, the Viking Stadium or whatever.
Okay.
And, it doesn't hit you that you're in the Super Bowl until like kickoff where like the lights go out, like all these flashes and stuff. I guess kind of throughout the week you have more media coverage than you usually do. But I felt like for me, like once the kickoff happened and like all the flashes and stuff, you're like, oh shit, we're in the Super Bowl. Throughout the game, man, like I've always been laser focused, but like I felt like in that game, it was even more for me. It's just like, I don't know the next time I'll be here. And it's like, I don't want to look back and be like, well, fuck, like I could have did this differently or, have any regrets. And so every play, like I was just super locked in, man. Played, really well, in the game, won the game. And then it kind of hits you like when the confetti falls, man.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing, you play, I guess 17 games now, but 16 at the time. And like, it's like you play 1 week, you flesh it. You play the next week, you flesh it. You play a new opponent. And so it's almost like when you get to Super Bowl and you win, it's like, oh shit, who we got next week? Oh, well, it's the end of the season, right? And so, when the confetti fell, man, like, I can't, describe the feeling. My mom was there, walking on the field and, seeing guys who played 15 years or even longer. And this was their first time even getting this far, even getting a taste. And so that even before the game, like, like I was saying, kind of instilled that like, dude, there's no guarantee you'd even get back the next year or when you'll ever get back. And so, yeah, man, I can't describe the feeling. It was an awesome feeling, amazing feeling. Being able to win a championship in the ultimate team sport, I don't think it just says a lot about me, but says a lot about the team and the coaches and kind of the things we went through, right? Because at one point we were 11-1 and, Carson Wentz, I mean, barring injury, probably would have been an NFL MVP, having an amazing season. And then, Nick comes in and all of a sudden it was like, oh, and this is outside in, not, inside out. Like we didn't think this, but I felt like the media kind of was just like, oh, Carson's having an amazing season. Now Nick is in, they're going to do so. And dude, people forget that like, Nick threw 6-7 touchdowns in the game. Nick had been a Pro Bowler before. Like Nick was a good player. Yeah. And Nick came in, man, and slinging a pill all over the field, man. And, again, the rest is history. And he did it against, again, like the greatest quarterback in NFL history, man. Right. And so, kudos to that team, the coaching staff. We bonded in history forever.
Because I know when Nick was like the backup QB and he took over, and when did you guys start to feel throughout that season like, oh, we have a chance to win it all?
Well, we were continuing to win games, and then the regular season is a regular season, but the playoffs is one and done, man. So it's like, how are you winning in the playoffs? Are you winning handily? Are you winning close calls? And it's funny to say because essentially it was a game before the Super Bowl, but coming into when Minnesota came to Philly, because we had a first round bye, and then playing after that, it was like the NFC Championship. They had the number one defense in football, and so it was just like, oh, like this is going to be a good test to see what the team is really like. And I'll just never forget it was a play. It was like a flea flicker. It was thrown to Torrey Smith, left side of the end zone, like deep ball. And I remember like Nick coming in the huddle, like opening the wristband, seeing the play call, and he said, all right, give me fucking time. It's going to be a fucking touchdown. And sure enough, man, like it was a touchdown. We were fucking rolling, man. It was like, I think we won like 38-7. I'm like, damn, like we're fucking good. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, I mean, you know, you got Tom and Bill, obviously in New England, but like, dude, like, you know, we got a chance to really make some noise. And, you know, I think our confidence was riding high, but we were, you know, confident, but not cocky, right? Like we understood who they were and like, you know, we didn't take them lightly. And then, you know, went into the game and handled business. So, yeah, NFC Championship, man, where, you know, it was 38-7 against a good football team.
Yeah.
And you could say like it was kind of a test for us offensively because they had the best defense in football. So that's when I knew like, shit, like we're actually like, you know, who we think we are. So.
And then once you're at the Super Bowl, you know, obviously you're playing Brady. He has, I think at that point, 5 Super Bowls. And the Patriots have a ton of great players as well. When you guys were doing, I don't know, throughout as you guys have like 2 weeks to prepare, was there, I don't know, any chatter about like them at all and the team you guys are facing amongst you and your teammates? Or were you guys just only focused in on, you know, getting yourself prepared yourselves?
Yeah, man. Like when people be like, "Oh, ignore the noise," man. You can't fucking ignore the noise. It's fucking Tom Brady and Bill Belichick over there. Like you know what the fuck's going on. So like, yeah, like we know who was across from us and what was going on. But you know, kind of to your point, like we were focused on like what we had been doing. Like let's not stray away from what we do well. Let's continue to invest and enjoy the the process, the journey, and that will get us to the destination that we wanted to get to. And so. Like, yeah, I mean, we knew who was across the ball. Like, shit, anybody playing football, you know, anytime you're lining up against Tom, you know exactly who the fuck Tom is. Same thing with Bill. But, you know, we, again, had confidence in, you know, what we could do as well. So we definitely lose focus.
And in those 2 weeks when you're preparing for the Super Bowl, do you guys have any kind of like mental training as well? You know, I'm sure you guys do a lot of like practice physically as well, but is there any like mental training as well?
Well, I think the league has done a good job in the last couple of years. I want to say the Eagles got a mental, I think they call it like a mental performance coach in 2020, maybe 2020?
A few years ago.
Yeah. But, you know, you can go in and like, you know, speak to him or her and, you know, kind of get things off your chest. Are we where we need to be? Probably not, but is it better than where it was? Like for sure. Like is the NFL team taking steps? I believe so. I also think that athletes are, you know, being more open and vocal about some of the struggles that they're having and being able to help other people that may be going through those same struggles. So I wouldn't say like, you know, those 2 weeks we like had like training or anything, but yeah, the NFL is like unlike anything you can ever think of, man. And it's like no matter where you came from or what you did before, like you just wouldn't be used to it. And so I just think it's something that you have to grow and mature through. And you figure out, you know, the best way, you know, to cope with, you know, everything going on. And you know, I wouldn't say like, you know, it gets, you know, easier, but you can cope with it a lot better. Especially like the better player you are, right? Because like more responsibility is on you, more, you know, I guess going along with that responsibility, like you're impacting the game a lot more. They're asking a lot more of you. And, you know, nobody's going out there thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go out there and fuck up today. Like you want to go out there and do your job.
Yeah.
And the talent gap is so, you know, razor thin that like, you know, you can win or lose, you know, essentially every play. And so it's just something that like you gotta, you know, get into, like accept, absorb, and really, you know, have good vets that can, you know, help you along and that you can lean on. And I was very fortunate in both places that I did.
On the note of the NFL being unlike anything anyone can really experience until they actually experience it, what were some of your most kind of important, if you have any off the top of your head, like key lessons that you took away from the entire experience, kind of in retrospect now?
Cliche to say, but, you know, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Because in the NFL, everybody is talented, right? Everybody's big, strong, and fast, or the biggest, strongest, and fastest where they came from. And now everybody's the same. It's like, what what sets you apart, right? Not just hard work, but like consistency. Like, can you work hard every play, week in and week out for years? I'd probably say, having good friends that you can lean on and have those tough conversations, whether you're going through or you're listening to them in a judgment-free zone, goes a long way as well. It's funny, never getting too high, never getting too low. But at the same time, we are human beings, right? So like, you got to feel those emotions, but you got to be able to control them is a bad word, but like be able to allow them to like go through you and understand that like, it's okay to be fucked up because you lost, or it's okay to be, up here because you won, but like, you got to be able to like bring that back. Dude, the NFL was just hard work, man. Like, I can't stress that enough. And, the analogy I used earlier was just a great analogy, man. It's every day. It's competition every day from the second you walk in to the second you leave. Somebody's, coming for you, or you're always being, graded. There is no grade non-disclosure. There's a scoreboard every day. Like, hey, like either you did good and you're still here, or you fucked up and you're fucking out now. And like, actually, when I went back for the first time in 2022, I went back to a training camp practice. It's funny, when you leave the game, you can see the game so much clearer, if that makes sense. When you're in it, it's all you know. And so that is like the normal. And so I went back, man. It was just like, I can see you giving 100%. And I can also see if you're giving 99%. And it's just clear, like the strain, like every second of every play, it's just like, it's just 100% like just strain every time. And I was like, damn, like, yeah, this is what this is. Like, you know what I mean? So, hard work, having fun, man. Like, yeah, I say have fun because you're in something where it's like, dude, you're not on scholarship, man. Like, people, got families to feed. This is fucking for real. Like, you ain't here to, bullshit around. But at the same time, you got to try to like have fun with it. And like, you can't be all like, all business all the time. And I guess I'm talking out two sides of my mouth when I say that, but like, you got to find something, the joke and the like laugh a little bit. Yeah. I can't say balance, man, because like, you can't, it's too much going on for you to really have balance. But like, just when you get a moment to look up and just take a deep breath, man, do it. 10 years flew by. When you're in it, it doesn't feel like it's flying by. But when I got in as a rookie, man, looked up, did this, year 3. I look back, down, look back up, did this year 6, look back down, look back up, did this year 10. And it's just like, fuck, like, where'd the time go? Like, all the people you met. And I still keep in contact with a lot of guys in Houston, a lot of guys in Philly. And so, those are those things that I learned and kind of cherish, as I look back. And I'll say this too, because I get this question a lot, like, do you miss it? And, people are always kind of shocked, like when I'm like, nah, man, like it's a closed chapter. It was an awesome time in my life, an amazing opportunity to play in the NFL. And just as it, did a lot of things for me, I tried to represent the game in the right way. But like, I feel like when people regret it, it's because you think back on like, oh, like, dude, like this one day in practice, I could have fucking worked harder, or in this game, like, in this one play in this critical time, like I took a play off and then this happened. There is not a play in practice, a play in the game that I look back and be like, I could have did this better, because every second I was there, I gave everything I had until I was done. And so I have no regrets. I will always love Houston and Philly, the cities I played in. I'll always love the NFL for giving me that opportunity. And, it's a closed chapter now, man. Like I had my time, and, there's no regrets.
It's great. I mean, I think that's all people can really ask for. NFL is definitely much more intense than most industries, but I do feel like no matter what you're doing in life, if you feel like you've given everything you possibly can, then yeah, no regrets. And I think that's a great lesson for everyone in any industry. Yeah. Before moving on to other parts though, I did want to, I was curious about the Super Bowl a little bit on like 2 plays. So one is when there was about 2 minutes and 21 seconds left in the fourth quarter, score is 33 Patriots, 38 Eagles. So I was wondering, so this is before the sack fumble that comes. I was wondering on the sidelines, are you guys nervous? Like, oh man, we gave him 2 minutes. He's done this before. Or are you guys just not talking to each other at all? Like, what is it like on the sidelines?
Dude, we're all standing up on the sidelines watching. Like, when he got the ball back, I mean, it's Tom Brady, right? Like, he won a Super Bowl when he was down 28-3. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we're like, damn, like, we probably gave him too much time. Like, we probably could have, ran a little bit more time off the clock. And, it came down to a play where, like, he threw a Hail Mary into the end zone. And, like, it was kind of a toss-up. But thankful for our secondary for, batting the ball down. But, yeah, we definitely were just kind of, like, watching and, seeing what was going to happen. Yeah, that was definitely, nerve-wracking for everyone.
Yeah, because you guys so close at that point.
Yeah, it's so close. The time's ticking down, man. Like, you're up. Yeah. And, like, you don't want to get it, like, stolen in the last minute. Like, you don't even have an opportunity to answer. Like, it's just ball game. You're just like, fuck, damn. You know what I mean? So, definitely seeing Tom Brady out there with an opportunity for, him to win. It's just like, God, like, you don't want to give him too much time. Like, he's proven too many times and he's too great of a player where it's just like, man, like, fuck,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I guess it's a kind of a tangential question, but Mahomes is obviously making a ton of noise and winning a lot over the past few seasons. Do you feel like he could be the potential GOAT?
I mean, if he wins the Super Bowl, what's this going to be, 3?
I think so, yeah.
I think it's going to be 3. Tom has 7. Mm-hmm. I mean, he has a ways to go, but, like, the pace that he's on, I mean, he wins consistently. He sets, records consistently. Andy Reid, I never played for him, but every player I have ever spoken to about Andy Reid has nothing but positive things to say. So that tells me he is an amazing human being along with a great coach. They did a great job of, keeping talent around him, building in areas that, say maybe were weak before and, strengthening those. So, I mean, he has the opportunity to continue to win. And, it's kind of like a Jordan LeBron question where it's like, well, if he doesn't have 7 rings, does that not mean, he could be out as the GOAT? But it's like, we'll see with time, what he does. But, I mean, dude, he's balling right now. Yeah. He's been balling for some time. Like I said, he has, some ways to go as, being considered, the GOAT. But, I mean, he's a damn good quarterback now. So, right. Yeah.
What are your plans for the upcoming Super Bowl, by the way? Are you?
I'm not doing shit.
Okay.
Nah, I mean, I'll watch it for sure. But, like, as far as going to it and stuff, what better seat can I get than on my couch, on TV, man? So, it's fun. The NFL does a great job as far as putting on events and, having everything, going on. And, it's in Vegas, which is always awesome too. So, if you ever get a chance to go, I mean, I would definitely, suggest going. Great experience. But, I'll probably just watch it on TV.
Gotcha. And I know you kind of touched upon it a bit in terms of winning the Super Bowl. It's indescribable. If you had to kind of put some words into it, or maybe has there been any other experiences in your life that have come close at all? Or is this like a singular event in your life where nothing really compares?
To winning a Super Bowl, huh? I don't know if anything has matched it, but, getting an award was pretty fucking high. The caliber of school it is, the people that have come out of here, the education you get, having the skill to take $1 and make it into 2, man, it's valuable too. So, getting an award and, getting along, this path as I, navigate this finance world, man, it's, maybe not winning the Super Bowl, but, it's not far behind.
Yeah. And I think the next thing I wanted to kind of chat a little bit about is injuries, mental health, and you've been very outspoken and also just kind of gone through a lot of what sometimes can be career-ending injuries. So I think it was your right Achilles in 2019, your left in 2020. I actually saw in an interview, you said that after your first tear, you're almost happy that you were kind of going through this. You said the NFL was tough, but you wanted some adversity. And I was curious. I don't know if you remember saying that. It was to Charissa Thompson in your interview with her?
I probably could have framed that better. But basically, it was just like, dude, like, everything was going like so, like, great, and like that has never been like my life. Like, I'm always going through things to make me better, and so I think tearing the Achilles, man, it was like, this was like January of 2019, before the 2019 season, and so all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, like he tore his Achilles, like, it's just a serious injury. Like, how's he going to bounce back? Is he going to bounce back? What will that look like? Like, can he make it back for the season? And like, so like all that shit was like, yeah, like I like this is what I'm used to. Like, this is what I need. Like, this is what essentially propelled me to come back and then be the best at my position in that year. And so it was just like that adversity was what I was used to continue to feed off of, to continue to, no matter how good I thought I was, like, to come back in record time and then, be the best at my position that year. It's always tough when you go through those type of moments, but like, you always come out, a better person, man. So like, was it tough? Was it hard? Like, hell yeah, man. Like, I had never had a serious injury like that. And, anytime you tell somebody you tore your Achilles, man, they're just, first thing, they're just like, oh, fuck. Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it is essentially kind of like you're literally like your spring. And so, yeah, when I tore my Achilles, man, yeah, it was tough. The first 4 weeks you're non-weight bearing, and then the next 4 you're like in a boot with a heel lift. Like, this is your heel up here. And so each week, like, you come down to your flat. The reason being is, like, if you stretch it out, too much, and then all of a sudden, like, you won't have that same spring to come back. And so, like, dude, learning how to walk again and learning how to, like, be able to do a heel raise. And then there's always a psychological part with an injury as well. Is it all the way healed? Like, I don't want to step wrong and then, something happens. But, my first reps coming back, I did like some one-on-ones versus the Baltimore Ravens. And the question was always like, yo, are you coming back too early? But, I felt good, man. Like, every day I was grinding, like I was doing extra reps. Like, that's just who I am. And so it felt good, man. And then, they actually were going to hold me out the first game, and I was fucking pissed. Like, I was fucking pissed because I did all this work to get back at the beginning of the season. Well, kudos to Doug and, kudos to the organization for, one, allowing me to play, but also having, trying to protect me from myself. But yeah, they let me go out there and play, 55 of the snaps, majority of the game, just to, get me back. And, it felt good. And, the rest of the season, was history, man. So, yeah.
How are you today with your Achilles and your legs and your feet? Is everything okay now, or do you still feel pain here and
Dude,
there?
I feel better than fucking ever, man. Like, when your bar is like so low because you're constantly banging, like, and you feel like shit. When you stop banging and like your body heals and like, you stay active and stretch and stuff, man, like, I feel better than, I did before. And, through the NFL, you're very fortunate that you have like world-class doctors and world-class, athletic trainers to, rehab you. And so, I mean, if you do what you need to do and put the time in, man, I mean, you will come back better and stronger. And, that was the case. And so, yeah, I have, no pain, no issues. Weirdly enough, I still get that question too, where it's like, I did like play after the Achilles, you know what I mean? Like, people always ask, like, yeah, man, like, how's the foot or how's the Achilles? Like, I mean, I played after, like, it was fine. Like, you know what I mean?
That's true.
But
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was saying earlier. It's just like, when I hear Achilles, man, you think like, fuck, like, that's going to impact you for life.
Yeah.
But nah, it's all good.
Shifting more to, I guess, like mental health instead of physical health. You've been outspoken about your diagnosis in 2016 of having an anxiety disorder. And you mentioned earlier as well that you would vomit at like 5 a.m. First, I was just kind of curious to understand how else it affected you, because was it the day before was it just during game days? And was it right before, like, would you not be able to sleep well? You mentioned, was it every time in the mornings you would wake up at a specific-ish time? How did it affect you on game days?
Yeah, dude, I woke up every practice and every game and threw up every day.
Every day?
Yeah.
Oh,
like,
wow.
But yeah, dude, for years, like, throw up in the morning if I go to practice, throw up before games. Like, you get so used to that shit, like, you don't even think about it. Like, it just is what it is. But, I had, great teammates and, it happened in Houston. Nobody really kind of knew what it was. I did all like the physical tests, and they were like, you're good. I think I maybe missed maybe 2 or 3 games there, and then I missed maybe 3 games here. Maybe, 2 games there, and
yeah, I think I saw a stat. It was like you missed 5 games in total throughout your career or something like that.
And so when I got here, Dr. Dorsheimer, who was a team doctor at the time, did the same kind of physical test. And he was like, dude, did you ever think it was something like mental? And I was like, fuck it out, man. And so you kind of navigate that road. And I always say, don't think times are better now, but in 2016, she was a lot different.
Yeah.
Speaking of mental health. And so, and I said this in an interview, it's not a woe is me situation. I don't need you to feel bad for me. I'll fucking figure it out. But it's this is just something I'm going through. This is, kind of what's going on, and I'll speak on it. But also, it's not going to be a road of, lollipops and rainbows, man. In something that you can't see, it's going to put people in a position where either, they ride with you or they not. And you can't expect everybody to ride with you. That's just not real life. And so, there's players, there was, coaches, who understood and, ones that didn't. And, I'm not here to, make you feel bad because, you didn't believe it. That's your choice. It is what it is. And so I always start just talking about that by kind of just saying all that, out of the gate. And so, as time has went on, it's great that athletes are, having the opportunity to be more vocal, to get the support they need, and for, people to, understand. But, I can't emphasize enough, that doesn't, give you the pass to, try to use it as a crutch or, not take your responsibilities. You got to understand that, we all got a job to do, right? And so, if something happens because you can't perform your job, man, that is what comes with it. And so, what I spoke about in the 16, man, did I think, because, I spoke to the media department, I had to speak to them about it because they were like, hey, the media's going to ask now, what's going on? And it's just and they were protecting me where it was just hey, man, this ain't really something that is really spoken about yet, a ton of people. And so, do you want to say it's something else? Or I'm just dude, I get fucking crucified for saying this shit, man, so be it. But I'll get to sleep good at night, man.
Yeah.
I can't sit here and, lie to everyone about, what I'm going through because I'm worried about how I'm going to be perceived, man. Dude, I'm fucking too old for this, man. You know what I mean? It just is what it is. Either you're accept it or you're not. And then, so I speak on the situation and what I'm going through and kind of diagnosis then. And then all of a sudden, dude, shit was on fucking ESPN or it was on CNN too. And I'm just dude, I didn't expect it to fucking, kind of go this route, right?
Yeah.
But, very fortunate, that it did for people that are, going through it. And, there's much brighter days ahead. And I always say, go out and get the help you need. Because it's better, with you here than without you here. You know what I mean? And so, whatever that helps looks like, go out and get it. Don't feel ashamed. We all need help. At times, man. So,
yeah.
100%. And, one thing that kind of moved me, man, was, Lane Johnson does this thing talking about, mental health Mondays where you tap in and, whatever. But, he had mentioned that I was the person that allowed him to talk about, his mental health and his struggles, man. And we were going through shit together, man. And, kind of just leaning on each other, through it. So, yeah, it definitely, moved me, and I'm very fortunate I was able to kind of make the impact the way I did.
Yeah, I actually think it's super important because for me as well, I've had, I didn't personally battle mental health issues as much, but I have family members who do, and there is a lot of stigma, at least, especially back in 2016, and so I feel as though athletes, when they have this big platform and they're able to talk about their struggles, it actually does make a really, really big impact across, the entire fan base or even more than that as well. So yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you about it. I think it's just very important. And I think that's one of the, besides the NFL stuff, one of the main reasons I did want to also kind of have you share your story with everyone who's listening right now. And I'm actually kind of curious, like looking back 8 years since your official diagnosis, like how is your relationship / battle with anxiety now? Like, is it now that you're not in the NFL, are you able to kind of keep it under check, or is it something that you sometimes still battle with?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I still battle with, and it'll be essentially a lifelong battle. But you get older and you become more comfortable in your skin. You become more comfortable with being okay with not being okay. And it's just like, whatever I'm going through, whatever I need, if I need to go talk to a therapist, like go talk to a therapist. If I need to fucking just get away and unplug and, just, I don't know, like get off the grid for a little bit, like, go do that. Cause, mental health is key. And I had a coach, actually, Jim Schwartz. He's the defensive coordinator for the Browns now. He was like one of the first people that came to me and was like, hey man, like we're gonna get through this. He said, a mental injury is just like a physical injury. Say you pull your hamstring, like you rehab it and then you come back stronger. And that's always like stuck with me. Nothing is permanent, man. Like it can, in some ways, be fixed or, at least, get the help that, puts you in a better like headspace and a better just space in general. So.
Yeah. On the note of therapy, I've also been going for the past few years. I think it's one of the best things I've actually done in my life. And I'm curious for you and your first session when you're about to go in, were you a bit skeptical about it, or were you going into it thinking like, oh, I think this can really help? I'm curious like what your take was going into it.
It was just like, dude, I've tried everything I could like on my own. And so like, I need some help, man. So like, if they say this is going to help me, like, I'm all about it. Yeah, I mean, you can say like people are skeptical about being a therapist where it's like, oh, like you can't handle your own problems, man. But like some of these problems, like most people don't want to understand. And so it's just like, yeah, let me go in here and like, get to the bottom of what's going on and like, what's the root cause of this stuff. And, it helped out. It was tremendous.
What were some of your biggest takeaways over the past, it sounds like you might still be going to therapy here and there. What have been some of your biggest takeaways? It could be lately or it could be throughout the entire journey.
First one, breathe. Like you got to breathe, man. You know what I mean? Like take deep breaths, man. Just breathe. If you need to pull away, pull away. Weirdly enough, one thing that like calms my nervous system down is cold temperatures. And so if I'm feeling, whatever, dude, go jump in like a cold plunge or go jump in a cold shower. The reason being is like when you're cold, dude, all your body's thinking about is just warming up. And so whatever you got going on in your head, man, like that shit is not the number one priority now. It's, about either trying to get out of the water. Yeah, you're surviving, right?
Yeah.
And so that like, whatever I'm feeling that way, calms me down for sure. So, like I said, man, like whatever it is, definitely go out and get the help and, do your thing. But those are some things that, help me out, along this journey. So, and then, again, being more comfortable in your skin as you get older and, knowing what you stand for and what you stand on. So,
yeah, I was, I guess now, thinking about retirement from the NFL. You decided to retire, I guess, 2 years ago around March 9th, 2022, and you still had a few years left on your contract. So I was wondering when you kind of realized, okay, it's time for me to retire.
Man, like I contemplated retirement a lot throughout my career. But, I love the game. I love my teammates. But yeah, man, like, I was the highest paid in my position twice, right? And I was in the middle of, again, being the highest paid and like, being, all world, whatever. But like, hey, man, like I had a good career. I started, getting more and more injuries. Started realizing like, dude, I'm older now too. Like there's more that I want to see accomplished and do in life. And so like, it was just like, it was time. I also like want to be able to walk and like, play with my kids and shit too. So like, when I have it one day, it was just like, hey man, like you've gotten hurt, your last 2 years here and there. It's time. Was it tough? The toughest part about retiring, man, is like, one, it's the thing you've done the most in your life. It has become a part of you. Now, it isn't who I am, it's what I did, but it's what I did since I was 12 years old, right? So like, I've done it a long time. Met a lot of great people, played for a lot of great organizations. And when I retired in Philly, man, played here 6 years. And so a lot of the guys I had formed, great bonds with. Jeffrey Stalin had formed, a tremendous bond with, and, Doug and Nick and, Howie and, Jeffrey Lurie. So walking away from that, man, that bond and that type of person, because only people like inside like know what that is like to go through every day. And so, it was definitely, I was definitely emotional, man. I didn't think I was gonna like fucking tear up and shit, dude. I just thought like, it's retirement, like, I'll move on. But dude, like that shit, like, because I wrote that speech, like my retirement speech, like a night before, man, and like I was reading through it, man, and like, oh, it's pretty good, man. And then like, all of a sudden you're doing it, in front of reporters and stuff, man, and like it's like you're thinking about all these great times you had and all these great people and times where you thought, you're in a shitty position, but like you're grateful for that and like all the things you learn and all the things you see and like on top of obviously all the fun times you had, it was just like, man, like it was a good run. Like, you know what I mean? So like, I definitely got more emotional than I thought I would. But at the same time, it just like let me know like how much like that shit mattered to me and how much I cared about it. To walk away, right? So, yeah, man. I wouldn't say the decision was tough in itself, but like actually saying like, yo, like I'm retiring, like this is it. And thinking all these people, man, and like kind of the flashbacks definitely like, kind of chokes you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like after you retired though, was it right after then you were taking the GMAT?
Yeah.
And then you applied round 3, decided to go to Wharton. You kind of mentioned your mom kind of pushed you to get an education. She had an MBA. But what made you decide to come to Wharton or apply for an MBA? Because you could have maybe taken another year off. You could have done any number of things. Maybe it sounds like actually to me that you enjoy kind of working towards something. So maybe you didn't want to take much time off. But yeah, why did you decide to get an MBA?
Well, the first thing is like, dude, like if I'd have stayed, took like a gap between retiring and, trying to go back for the NBA, like shit, there's no guarantee I'd have came back for the NBA. Like, dude, I might have just enjoyed just fucking being retired now, right? And so I didn't even want to put myself in that position, one. Two, specifically why Wharton? Wharton is a super technical school. I mean, it's essentially known as kind of like the math school. The best way it was kind of like explained to me was like, if you want to be an entrepreneur and kind of a startup guy, like you go to Stanford. If you kind of want to be like a COO, you go to Harvard. If you want to be a CFO, you come to Wharton. Mm-hmm. And so like, what is my biggest weakness? Like coming out is like the technicals. And it's just like the more math and technical skills I can get from such a prestigious university, like why would I not go there? And obviously it's in my backyard. And so, yeah, actually the week before I announced my retirement, I was supposed to do it the first week, but waited till the second week because I had to take the GMAT first.
Right.
And what they don't tell you, like these testing centers, right? It's like, it ain't just GMATs here, right? Like it's all tests. And so like you walk in, it's kind of like for people that don't know, like the DMV waiting area. Yeah. And like, dude, like nerves are on 10. Like people are just in there like, you're just like, fuck. Like I just like, what did I walk into?
Yeah.
And so, I took that GMAT like that right the first week after that season, which, announced my retirement the second week. And, fingers crossed. And, I'll never forget this date, May 11th, because I got accepted to Wharton that day. And I also got inducted into my College Hall of Fame that day. And so that'll always kind of stick in my mind. But, Wharton made sense. And, Wharton's been, more than I can ever, dream of, not just from the education piece, but the people, like learning from, amazing students, super smart students, amazing professors. They give you, I feel like, more resources than, you know what to do with, like in order for you to succeed. So, Wharton was was great. And yeah, I needed to jump into it, right away, man. So,
and this is kind of a detail that I picked up on when we were in class together for managing established. You're like really good at memorizing everyone's names. Are you just naturally good with faces, or do you have a really good memory? Or like, it's not just me actually. A lot of people were like, oh yeah, Brandon like knows my name. He like says hi to me when like we're walking by, and he just remembers everyone's name. And I think actually at Wharton, when you're meeting like 800 classmates, everyone forgets each other's names at the beginning. I'm wondering, like, are you just really good with faces, or have a good memory? Or
I mean, fuck, I'm gonna forget my classmates' names, man. But dude, like over my career, man, I've met thousands of people, man, and like, when you connect, like, in Wharton's a super friendly place, right? So like, I'm seeing people every day, and like, I think it's important to remember somebody's name, man. Like, I mean, we've all been there where it's like, oh, hey, like, what's up, man? Like, what I mean? Because you forgot, but like, I like the small things. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I should know some like people, like my classmates' names, you know what I mean? So I never even like thought about that until you brought it up. But yeah, I feel like I should,
Yeah, I do know everyone obviously does give an effort to know each other's names and stuff. I think it just seemed like you were particularly good at it, but maybe it just comes naturally, and you said, you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I also remember, because you sat like 2 seats away from me, and then you would always bring your printout of the lecture, and then seem pretty studious. So I'm actually curious, like, what is the nerdiest thing about you? Because there must be like something. It seems like you're pretty into education. Wonder if there's anything that stands out.
So what Ben is talking about, like every class I've had at Wharton, like before I come to class, like I print the notes off, like I come prepared, I come organized.
Yeah.
It's things that take no talent, like working hard, showing up on time, being prepared. And the NFL was the same way. So like, for example, like, dude, we have people at Wharton, right, that like show up late consistently. In the NFL, if you show up late, that's $1,000. So like, you don't come late. And so like, it was like super foreign to me. Like somebody to walk in like 10, 15 minutes late, like what? Like, what happened in the NFL? First off, if you're not a guy, you're probably getting fucking cut right now. So like, and then like, if you're that late, like without an excuse, like, yeah, that's a fine. And so like, I feel like it just takes no effort, like to just be on time and show up. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm always like prepared, because like I can imagine going out on the field and like having absolutely no idea what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing out here. Like people get hurt doing shit like that, or you get your quarterback killed doing shit like that. And so like it's just been ingrained in you to do the things that take no talent consistently. And you'd be surprised, like. I always feel like luck is just, opportunity, meets just being prepared. I think a lot of times, like, people get the opportunities, but they're not prepared when it comes. And so for me, it was just like, dude, if I get, compared to a lot of students at Wharton, man, like, essentially I'm starting behind because I didn't have a undergrad finance degree. I didn't work in the finance industry before I came here. And essentially, it's like going to Wharton is like getting drafted twice, right? Like you're drafted in the NFL, but then like, because I feel like Stanford, Wharton, and Harvard, like there is a baseline of education that is higher than most that is required, and that's why it's so competitive, and like why the degree and the brand like weighs so heavy. And so it's like, let me do the things that I can control, and then put the time in, into school. So the nerdiest thing I did, and I'm a lot better at this now, but like my first year, dude, like I would go to class and, say I get out at 5. I would go home and eat if I got out at 5, I get home at 6, I'm a slow walker. From 6 to 7, I would eat, watch TV. And then from 7 to midnight, I would study. I would do that every day.
Wow.
And then I would do that on Fridays. I would do that on Saturdays. And then if I needed to, I would do that on Sundays. And I did that for a full year.
Wow.
And so like, to what I was saying earlier, man, it's not about, the time. It's just the ground that I needed to make up. And it didn't matter to me how long it took or what I missed out on to make up that ground and to be able to compete. And so after a year of doing that, and then, somewhere at Goldman, coming back now, it was like, okay, now like I can move around. I understand like the lingo. I understand how things are flowing through the financial statements and like different things like that. And so now I'm more comfortable, and I to what I was saying earlier, know what I don't know, and try to strengthen those skills as well. But for me, it just didn't matter like how long it took or what I needed to do. I just knew where I needed to go and what that took. And so, that took me, not watching TV other than like that hour and grinding, from 7 until, so be it.
What have been your favorite classes so far?
First one is valuations with Dr. Wessel's class is absolute just fire.
Yeah, I took that too.
Yeah, so unbelievable class, unbelievable professor. Learned a ton, and specifically like what I'm going into, like I just thought it applied really in every aspect.
Tells a lot of great stories too.
He
throughout
does.
the class.
He does. He's a great professor. And so I'm an accounting and business analytics major. And so I've had a lot of accounting classes, and dude, the accounting professors are like super sharp. Like, and I feel like accounting at Wharton isn't taught from like a tax preparing perspective. It's taught from like a valuation perspective. And so whether it's like Dr. Lambert, Dr. Ittner, Dr. Fisher, like we're just riding through like 10Ks and the financial statements. How does this flow through this? Like, what does this look like? Like, what does this do? Like, if we, go and, buy a percentage of a company, like, how does this? And so a lot of my accounting classes, and, I get it, like, people think accounting, like, it's super dry or, it's boring. But if you think about a big picture, man, I mean, no matter what you're doing in some capacity, like you're touching some type of concept in accounting. And so a lot of my, accounting classes have been really good too. I'm in the accounting for complex financial structures now. The class is tough, don't get me wrong, but dude, every day I walk out of there, I learned something. So that's been a good class. Now you got me thinking, man. I'd probably say those top two for sure.
You seem to like the technical ones more. Did you take any of the more, I don't know, qualitative leadership-ish ones at all, or like psychological ones?
Yeah. So obviously I took Establish with you. I'm in strategy and competitive advantage now. I'm trying to think of other qualitative ones that we were like, we got to take marketing class, but as you know, at Wharton, like marketing has a lot of statistics in it.
That's
and
true.
Like it's very math based at Wharton. So like, it's qualitative, but it's quantitative too. But those classes were good from a strategy and like big picture perspective. You're entering new markets. Here's what you need to look out for. Here's what you need to do. Here's how you scale. Here's how you thrive. And some of the pitfalls that come along based on cases that people got into something thinking it was one way and come to find out it was another, and here's why. So. Nah, those are good. But yeah, to what you're saying, like I've taken a lot of quantitative classes, for that reason. So. And
your former teammates, do they ever ask you about your MBA experience, or are they not curious about it?
Yeah,
it's not like the most common path for an athlete to go, get an MBA and all of that.
Players, coaches, which has been interesting. It has been, how like older management sees it, right? Because it's like a lot of owners, right? Like they didn't play football, like they were businessmen. So going back to get an MBA, they're like, oh shit, like he's doing his thing. So that's been cool to see, and different teammates have reached out, like I want to do businesses. Like, what do you think about this? Or like, what do you think about this? And things like that. So that's been cool. I mean, it's not like I know everything by any means. A lot of learning to go, but if I can help out, I definitely do and have. So, yeah.
I'm also curious to know what, and this could be class related or just from the various different resources or events and experiences that Wharton has, any like one or two key important lessons that you've learned throughout this year and a half so far?
I mean, a lot really, but one or two off the top of my head. Nobody has it figured out. Nobody has all the answers. People may appear to think they do, or may appear to make it seem like they do, but they have no fucking idea. Everybody's in the same boat trying to fucking figure it out. Don't, feel bad because you think somebody else got to figure it out and you don't. I mean, realistically, they probably don't either. And you're at an institution like this where, one, it's okay to fail. Like, this is the space to fail. This is the space to, step out of your comfort zone, try new things, experience new things, challenge yourself. And, you'll be a better, person for it. So I guess all that to say, like, nobody has it figured out. Like, it's okay. You don't know. You are on your own path. This is why you're here. And in due time, you will figure it out. There's no clock on you to figure it out. And two, like, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there because, not everybody knows everything, man. There's always something, new to learn, so I'd probably say those two.
Mm. And on the note of, not knowing what to do next and all, so I wanted to ask you a bit about your experience at Goldman last summer. First of all, like, what made you want to go do a summer in banking instead of even something like compared to like consulting or, there's other business internships and things like that you could have done. Why did you choose banking?
Dude, I'm a competitor and I'm a grinder, man. Through my different internships in the off seasons, I realized that I couldn't do anything to chill because that's never been my life. My life has always been high stakes, high pressure, high visibility. How would I say it? High stakes, high pressure, high visibility. And I needed something very similar. And so all that to say, like, I kind of boiled down to investment banking or trading. I think to be more well-rounded, I think, investment banking will provide that opportunity. And so it was like, okay, like, where will I go where, the brand is strong, I'm gonna get a ton of deals, really like a ton of reps is probably a better way to say it. And like the deal flow would be good, man. And so like going to Goldman, TMT investment banking, like it made sense. The funny thing about it for whatever reason is like, there is no secret about investment banking, right? Like you're going to work long fucking hours. It's going to be fucking tough. Like that is what investment banking is, but I'm a firm believer in the 10,000 hour rule. And it's like the more hours you work, the closer you get, or the faster you get to that 10,000. And like, will it always be fun? Like, yeah, probably not. But like, dude, you're grinding, man. Like this is the time to like, figure it out and get going. And to what I was saying earlier, man, I enjoy the journey just as much as the destination. So, first 5 weeks, man, like I was working, like 6 days a week, 15, 16 hours. And the last 5, it was like 7 days a week, 15, 16 hours. But fuck, dude, I loved it, man. Like it was great. It was. Now the days are longer than when I was playing, but dude, like I was learning so much from so many different people, seeing so many new different things, and like it was just like rolling through. And so like, yeah, dude, it was a fucking awesome experience. Like, and it's funny because people are like, dude, it's like, how was your summer? And like as if I'm gonna say something, like, oh, dude, like I fucking hated it. Nah, dude, I fucking loved it. Like I was built for this shit. Like I love this shit. Like, you know what I mean? So like yeah, like I mean that is, the experience, and I had, a great group of summer associates as well, that I worked with, and, full-time people, not just senior people, but, analysts as well that taught me a ton of different things, man. So I have absolutely no complaints. It is hard, but like for me, like, why would I want it any other way? Like, it's just what I'm used to. So it just made sense.
That has got to be one of the most like refreshing in some ways, and also most positive responses I've gotten for like, how'd you like your summer in banking? Because, I worked in banking. I actually also had a pretty positive experience because my team had good deal flow. Culture was really good. And so when I talk about banking, I think a lot of times the industry gets vilified, and sometimes rightly so. But I also felt like, especially in the first 6 to 12 months, I was learning so much every day. And I was like, I also don't mind working hard as well. And so, but when I sometimes ask my other friends, they're like, oh, I hated this part or that part. And it's refreshing and great to hear that perspective as well, that of how you liked your summer in banking. And I'm curious to know what kind of projects they had you working on.
So I was on, 3 live deals and 2 client services, everything under the TMT umbrella. And so it was like, I'm doing this over here one day, under the tech, and then another thing like, under the media, and then telecom, and like, kind of like going back and forth, and like, you got so much stimulation, man. It's just like, you got so much shit going on. So, right, like, I feel like you're probably doing one of like three things. Either scheduling calls and taking notes, and then either working in Excel or like working in PowerPoint. And there's always something to do. Like, people are always counting on you. Like, you're on a team, and what you're doing like is important. You're not just, sitting there, bullshitting away. And so, seeing all those different things, and, you're on calls with, CEOs of well-known like companies, man, like learning from them and seeing how, senior leadership, right, can like almost like see like stuff coming before they see it, and like how they address it, or how people take a complex idea and make it simple so somebody can digest and understand it. But then like, if you want to get in the weeds, like they can get in the weeds too. And so like seeing all that different, seeing how they move and flow through that, man, like, dude, it was good. And, that's what I was learning and, attempting to do over the summer. And, walking out of there, it was like, okay, like I can do this well, like, I'm good at this, but then like this, like, I need to tighten this up. And so, kind of scheduling my classes kind of like around, that. And, that's why, I accepted the offer, and, I'm going to go back full time. So yeah, dude, I had a great experience. And yeah, I'm definitely one of those guys, like if I didn't, like I would fucking say that too. But yeah, no, I had a phenomenal experience, man.
So you're going back, I guess it's this fall-ish or summer for training. And then do you kind of plan right now at least, are you planning your life out where I hope to stay working in the financial industry for X number of years, or I don't know, how are you thinking about your next 5-10 years?
Yeah, no, I want to stay in the financial industry. There's no like box or timetable I'm putting on it. I enjoy, the path that I'm going down. It's just kind of, as of right now, like it's the Goldman step. And then, whatever comes after that, like comes, and then I'll make that decision. Like, if it comes, like, it could be, whatever. And so, I don't want to like, overthink the shit or like, think too far out. But, yeah, get prepared for that. We started with training like July. So, there'll be another, adjustment. It'll definitely be, tough to live in Philly or leave Philly. It's the second longest city I've lived in other than Milwaukee. But, it's a new chapter, and I get the opportunity to, go into something and see, what I can do. And so, yeah, man, look forward to it. But again, not getting too far, over my skis at the same time. So,
what did you feel like during your summer was like? Because in case you might not have seen some of the videos on this channel and all of that, there's a lot of focus on like investment banking content and stuff like that. And I'm curious to know what you found to be the toughest parts of the job beyond maybe. Well, it sounds like for you the work-life balance was not even the tough part. Any of like the tasks you were doing, what did you find like the most challenging?
Yeah, so to your point about balance, man, I've always been in balance. So like that's where I'm most comfortable. So like, being consumed by work like is nothing new for me. But like, it's my first corporate job. So like seeing like kind of like how the office runs is one thing, and then seeing how fast you can pick up skills, modeling, doing DCF operating models, what they call it, PVF. SP, like all that type of stuff. Like, yeah, it's new for me. It's the first time I did this. And meanwhile, like, dude, you got 22-year-old analysts just fucking wizards in there, dude. Fucking just running their computer, not touching the fucking mouse.
Yeah.
Dude, this shit is like, holy shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're like born for this. Like, they are just smoking it. And so it's just like, similar to like being at Wharton. Like, you got to put the time in and you got to learn. And so I think, from where I was until, when I left, like I made great strides. But again, like there are things I needed to work on. And so, tailored my schedule to those things so I can be prepared when I go back. So, yeah, the toughest thing was just, going through all the Excels, making sure all the numbers tied, making sure you don't see fucking rough and value in the cells. Like, you know what I mean? Like making sure you're not hard coding shit. Like, like.
So tempting to hard code when everything's
Until like something doesn't flow, or like you change something here and like that shit doesn't change. Oh fuck, dude. Like, or you got to try to figure out like where you fucked up, dude. That's the model, like.
And you just change one thing in like the sheet, Excel with like 10 different sheets, and that one cell can mess up everything. Yeah.
Now you're stuck here for like another fucking 5-6 hours trying to figure this shit out. So it's just like understanding like the basics, what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Areas where like you can have some flexibility as far as like what's going on in there. But yeah, I mean, between that, by the end of the summer and then like. Up until now, man, just working on modeling, like constantly rolling, building those skills. It's kind of, been my focus. PowerPoint, I felt like I took to a fish like out of water, or in the water actually, to a fish, yeah. PowerPoint I got pretty quickly as far as like moving shit around and, fonts and all the different type of shit, shortcuts in there. And then, when you're, on different calls and stuff, understanding kind of like what that dynamic is. Like, I don't want to say like when to speak and when not to speak, but like essentially like, yeah, man, like, you know what I mean? Like letting people, kind of do what they need to do and like knowing when to chime in and like, give your thoughts and like when, shut the fuck up and let them, do their thing. Right. So, it was a completely new like learning experience, but yeah, it was good. And I walked away knowing, where I needed to improve and what those tough tasks were. So,
yeah, I remember as an analyst, I pretty much didn't say anything on any phone calls with clients unless we were there in person. I'd say hi or something like that. And I'm curious to know what you thought about Goldman's culture. Kind of like, how would you describe it to? There's a lot of people who are watching who want to get into banking and they're curious to know what Goldman's like. Like, what was your take on it?
So I feel like it gets vilified, in the wrong way. And what I mean by that is like, people say it's a cutthroat culture, but like, it's not like that, right? Like I went in and, people were willing to help me out. Like I watched people interact with other people as well. Willing to help, super smart people, super sharp people, like people fucking on their shit now. Like, don't get it twisted. Like you come in there, like you're coming to compete. Like, you got some of the best people in the world at what they do. And so, you will be in there working and like there is a standard that is set and that bar is set high for a reason.
Yeah.
But the culture was good, man. Like from analysts to, more senior people were willing to help, reach out. I feel like the things with investment banking are kind of just universal, man, where it's like, this is the bar, this is what is expected to be done, how it's supposed to be done, like in an investment banking, setting. So, I just feel like it, gets a bad rap as far as like what the culture is. But once you get inside, man, and actually know what the culture is, man, it's a great culture. Obviously an apprentice culture. And so you're doing a ton of stuff, and learning a ton of things, on the job in real time. So,
yeah. I also have a good number of friends at Goldman, and things get rough here and there, but generally speaking, and across most banks, if you're in the right group, and they have a strong culture, then that could be like a huge contributor to a positive experience. Because every group across the different banks can have very different cultures, but it sounds like TMT in New York pretty strong, and definitely obviously great deal flow as well. And I'm also curious to know, so for when you were, this is kind of going back to a little bit of your NFL days, but I had seen in like an article or video or something that you are really into martial arts and then trained in like Kung Fu and Jiu-Jitsu. And, as an offensive guard, I guess you have to be like pushing people off you all the time. So like there's a lot of things that translate between those two. And so my question is, when you're thinking about your career in the NFL and now in banking, I'm sure there are so many things that we've talked about that are implicitly, we know how you'll bring those to banking, but I'm curious to know, like, how will you bring what you've learned from the NFL into banking?
I thought it was going to be a martial arts question, actually. It's what I was saying earlier, right? Like the hard work, the persistence, the consistency, like that is, a must and not something that like is inconsistent, like that is consistently me and will be consistently me over time. Being a quick learner, getting shit done consistently also. But, being able to, the soft skills, being on TV, being in those, tough situations where, you're facing adversity, but like you got to, speak to the media about essentially how you fucked up. You got to take responsibility. Not taking shit personal because I'm getting, coached hard or, getting fucking screamed at because I fucked up. Like, that's part of like, what it is. And so, I say those and, just being able to, public speak or speak about anything and, have confidence in that. Things between the soft skills and, the consistency, hard work and persistence and, being able to apply what I just learned and actually be proficient at it, quicker than later. So, yeah.
Got it. And at the associate level is when you're definitely starting to go to client meetings more and definitely at the VP level and above as well. So I'm sure you'll bring a lot of what you just said about your just getting to know people and being comfortable in these kind of new situations with clients and all of that. So I think we've covered so much now about like your life and your career in the NFL, mental health, banking, Wharton. And just as like a final question, I'm curious if you could give yourself advice, going back when you're 20 years old. Plus also if you have any career advice for anyone watching now that you have like these very different type of paths you've been on. So one, like what would you tell your former self when you're young? And then also like if you have any general career advice for people.
So what would I tell myself when I was young? What's the Winston Churchill quote where it's like, defeat is not fatal. It's like the courage to continue on, picking yourself back up, that counts. And so, we're in a world now where like, you kind of fail publicly. Like it's, it's no like kind of hiding, and you will fail. And the more you, invest in something, obviously like, the bigger, you can feel when you fail. But, failure isn't fatal. Like dust yourself up, get up and, try again. Like, it'll be fucking hard. Like shit'll fucking suck. Like, but, through those times, through those trials, those tribulations, that is, how you build up that, resiliency, like over time. And so don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to, go against, the grain for what, you believe in, what you want to do, how you want to do it. So that's probably what I would, tell my younger self. And then just general career advice, man. It's like, don't take anything for granted, man. Go out there and work hard. Go out and, give it all, each and every time. I don't know. I feel like people get so caught up in trying to be fucking cool and shit. Like, fuck being cool. Like, you're trying to be fucking cool. You're trying to be fucking successful. You know what I mean? Like, in whatever that looks like. You go out there and do what you got to do, how you need to do it. And, don't really, worry about what anybody else has to say about, what you got going on. Right? So, I'd say that. And, let me think. I'd probably say those two things, like overall, man.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end the whole conversation. So, I know you're busy. Wharton and just MBA life is so crazy. So thanks for, stopping by and agreeing to chat. But it's been great chatting with you.
Man, appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Brandon. I hope you all enjoyed this interview with Brandon. I personally found his story to be so unique and inspiring. Despite all the challenges that he had growing up and also in the NFL battling an anxiety disorder, he was able to persevere, win the Super Bowl, be one of the top guards in the NFL, and go to 3 Pro Bowls. Just so many accomplishments despite all the challenges he faced. And now transitioning to a pretty challenging industry in investment banking. You know, pretty much I would say one of the toughest, if not the toughest, kind of finance job that you can really have. And so just such a interesting path when I look at it personally. And I think what I really took away is not to ever put yourself in a box. You know, Brandon, any athlete, you don't ever think that they would go into investment banking, but from talking to him, I can really see he has a passion for business and finance. And so for yourself as well, you know, if you have something you truly want to do and you're not necessarily known for that, or you feel like it's a little bit of a reach, I would just say go for it. And I think that's like for me, one of the key takeaways from my conversation with Brandon. And before I let you go, I wanted to let you guys know about two things. One is if you're interested in an MBA to meet classmates like Brandon, then I'm working on a how to get into MBA course. And you can sign up for that early using my link in the description. And then also I have a meme page for MBA as well called Liquid MBA. And it's sometimes just poking fun at the MBA experience, but there's some truth behind every post as well. I hope you find it entertaining and also educational at the same time. So yeah, check those out if you're interested. With that said, thank you guys all so much for tuning in as always, and hope to catch you all in the next video or interview. Thanks guys, and peace out.